It's time for another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas, the podcast covering the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in general here in the Ozarks. Whether you are considering a move to this area or trying to learn more about the place you call home, we've got something special for you. Here's our host, Randy Wilburn.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and I'm excited to be with you today. As I always am, I'm sitting here in the Furman Garner Performance Studio at KUAF Public Radio here in Northwest Arkansas. Certainly want to encourage you to support them where and when possible. And as you guys already know, the drill, this episode is featured on Ozarks at Large every Tuesday. So they typically take a segment of our show and share it out on the Ozarks at Large for that Tuesday. So hopefully you'll hear this particular episode while you're driving in your car, maybe somewhere, even if you haven't subscribed to the podcast. But I'm excited to be with a good friend of mine, Alvin Singh, and Alvin and I go back to his days at Kiva and working with Martha Londigan and just, that's kind of, I think, where we originally met. And then what I didn't know was that Alvin was carrying a deep, dark secret with him that he hadn't shared with me. And that secret was simply that he was the great nephew of Leadbelly, the famous musician Leadbelly, who arguably is the person that created the whole term woke. Which I thought was really interesting. And I learned more about that recently. And as a historian myself, I really appreciate when I learn new things about history that I think I knew, or at least I think I have a handle on. And that was certainly not the case when it came to Leadbelly. And so I had Alvin come visit my Rotary Club, which is the downtown Fayetteville Rotary. It's the largest Rotary Club in Northwest Arkansas. And he spoke about Leadbelly. And there were so many musicians in that club that love Leadbelly and love Johnny Cash. And I mean, just love really good music, especially blues music. And because we're in kind of like right at the footsteps or a doorstep of the Delta, blues is big, especially in Arkansas. And so I thought it would be great to have Alvin come on. They just recently did a juke joint presentation with him and several others in this area at the Pryor Center, where they showed what a juke joint looked like. And, if you walked into the atrium of the Pryor Center, you would see the juke joint sitting up in one location. And so there's just a lot of history in Northwest Arkansas as it relates to blues music. And this is no exception. And so I thought, you know what, why don't we bring on Alvin? He lives here in Northwest Arkansas. He has a kinship with Leadbelly. And why don't we bring him on the podcast to share his story? Because I think you guys would really be interested in this. So without further ado, Alvin Singh, I wanted to welcome you to the podcast. And this is actually not the first time that you've been on the podcast. No. You were on when we talked about
Martha.
Kiva.
Yep.
Yeah, with Martha.
Thank you, man. Thank you for letting me join, and hello to everybody listening.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, certainly it's my pleasure. I would love for you just to kind of talk about Leadbelly. Mm-hmm. And why don't you just kind of just talk a little bit about who Leadbelly is, and just talk about the relevance to both the music world, but more importantly to the regional audience here in Arkansas.
Yeah. So Leadbelly, to give a visual for all the audio people, the image that I get of him is John Henry.
Yeah.
The guy who built the railroads, yes. that big folk hero. And actually Leadbelly has a song called John Henry.
Okay.
And so that's the image. Somebody who short stature, is what Pete Seeger said, and very, he spent time in the chain gang. So he's originally from Shreveport, Louisiana, but he grew up playing guitar in Dallas, Texas, and Texarkana area with Blind Lemon Jefferson, who's, another legend himself. And
I don't know, but I gotta stop for a second.
Yeah.
I love the names.
No.
The names more than anything else.
Blind Lemon.
I mean, it's like, who thinks of that? Nobody, well, and I'm sure there's a story behind every name.
I was going to say, speaking of Arkansas, Jeff Place at Smithsonian, I asked that. I said, well, what do you think of the names? He said, there's a guy named Ironhead that did the first recording of Rock Island Line.
Okay.
And he was another prisoner. And I was like, okay. So these were kind of like, like today rappers' names,
Sure.
So you got Ironhead and you got Lead Belly and Blind Lemon and all of these guys.
Like if you think of like Raekwon and Ghostface Killah,
right.
Method Man and all that. Yeah. So, okay.
So that was that. And so his real name, Hughie Ledbetter. So it probably rhymed with that, Lead Belly. He spent a lot of time playing in, like you said, juke joints, bar taverns, everywhere he could play, in the deep ellums in actual Dallas. And he actually spent, and we can go more into this later, but he actually spent 2 prison terms that he famously he sung his way out of prison.
Yeah.
Then he lived in New York City, befriended people like Woody Guthrie, Paul Robeson, Josh White, Sonny Terry. List goes on and on. Even was befriending the guy who was the director of Rebel Without a Cause.
Okay.
10 years before the movie came out.
Right.
His name Nicholas Ray.
Okay.
So these were really good friends of Harry Belafonte. The list goes on. And then he passed away in 1949 from ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease.
Oh, wow.
Which at that time was still, Lou Gehrig was the only other person. Iron Man himself, Iron Man of baseball.
Right.
And so that was in 49. And after that, there's been actually more history and stuff from his passing to today.
Really?
And his influence. So,
man. Yeah. And so I think, and here's the thing, and folks that are listening to this, I'm going to put a link in the show notes. I'm going to link to as much as I can in the show notes based on this conversation. But you just recently were at an event at the Apollo, world famous Apollo Theater, where you got to sit down with Kai Wright, who is the host of, what's the name of the
Notes from America.
Notes from America on WNYC. Which is WNYC has some of the longest running radio programs, period, on radio. And he interviewed you live in front of an audience of people at the Apollo Theater to talk about Lead Belly and to talk about, the fact that he had come up with the expression, stay woke, I think is what he said.
Yep.
But it wasn't necessarily used in the same way that it's been used today, although it has actually been co-opted and utilized this way. And a lot of times we hear things and we think, oh, that's fresh, that's new. And a lot of times it's not new.
It's not. Mm-hmm.
It's been around for a long time. You know, I was talking with a good friend of yours as before you walked in, and we were talking about how the influence of music carries on from one generation to another, and how you can hear the influence of Lead Belly's music in Johnny Cash's music.
Right.
And then you hear the influence of Johnny Cash's music in somebody else's music that is current, right? And all of that dates back to Lead Belly and others that played during those early years. And especially when you hear the lyrics of some of the stuff that Lead Belly created, you're like, man, he was way ahead of his time.
Yep.
And at the same time, he was just dealing with life as a black man in the Jim Crow South.
Yep.
So, I mean,
at the same time.
At the same time. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting. So.
Yeah, no, musically. So on that point, he played the 12-string guitar. Mm-hmm. So he called himself the king of the 12-string guitar. That is to separate himself. He was, was also a big part of marketing himself. And even today, it's hard. I meet guitarists all the time. I say, do you play the 12-string? No. So very few people play it. It's very loud. It's a lot more strings.
Mm-hmm. Well, 12.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the musical background. Now, the event that you were talking about was a Martin Luther King celebration, and the theme was Martin Luther King woke.
Mm-hmm.
And I started it off by giving the origins of the first time we heard the word woke,
right?
Which on a recorded song that he did on the Scottsboro Boys,
right?
Which is Scottsboro, Arkansas.
Sure.
Which I still haven't understood that part, because the train left from Chattanooga, but the fight took place in Alabama.
Yeah.
But the court trial is called the Scottsboro Boys. And then Lead Belly says when you go down to Alabama. So I think that's because the train stopped there maybe. But
right.
Needless to say, in that song, at the very end, he explains as a warning, if you go down south, stay woke.
Right.
Basically, keep your head on the swivel. In 1962, the next time we saw the word woke was a New York Times op-ed from William. His name is crossing my name, but it's William Kelly.
Okay.
Kelley. And he mentions just on the headline about staying woke. After that, it was used in protests and just in vernacular. But Erykah Badu has a song called Master Teacher where she says stay woke. So and then today, it's just a common term that we always see. What I recognize from that is there's woke and then there's wokeness.
Mm-hmm.
So wokeness is more of a pejorative. Is it more like a negative, right? It's more, oh, you're a tree hugger.
Sure.
Many of my friends come to my house and they see my recycle just piled up. And I say, yeah, I'm about to, take it to the recycle. Oh, you're a tree hugger. And it's a joke, or are they trying to, make fun of me? And they're not really kind of, congratulating me. So wokeness, as we hear a lot of political, pundits and people say that, cancel culture and wokeness.
Right.
And they just kind of mention it as something negative. What I think, in the reference to Dr. King and anybody really, woke is more being aware.
Right.
In Leadbelly's case, yes, he was talking about racial injustices, but I think that the term can still expand to many different things, women's rights, climate change,
sure,
workers' rights, digital privacy rights. That's a real big thing today. Everybody uses all of these technologies, and how aware are we of the privacy data? So you can say, hey, stay woke on what you're doing. So that was the interesting thing about it. And this summer, I was bombarded with emails and links, starting with a Morning Joe show.
Mm-hmm.
And he, mentions Leadbelly, has the picture of him on the screen.
Yeah.
Talking about the origin.
Sure.
And then it was Joy Reid show. And then actually Steve Bannon's podcast. And Steve Bannon comically actually says this next song is an American patriot. His name is Leadbelly. And he goes on to play Midnight Special.
Interesting.
So my question has been in this is, if one side is using, woke is for awareness and it's about everybody's understanding of injustices, and the other side, well, wokeness is just a distraction on these things. But the top political strategist for the right, Steve Bannon, calls him a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the guy who created this term "stay woke."
Right.
So they're not educating their constituents on that. A week after that, the former president is facing a trial in Georgia.
Sure.
And his lawyers used the Scarborough Boys case as an example of why he should extend his trial.
Oh, right. Okay. That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
The judge comes back and says, there's no mob outside waiting for you. This is not, it's not the same.
Yeah, it was a reach.
It was very much a reach, So that was interesting where, you're using the Scarborough Boys case as an example to extend yours.
Sure.
But then you're, anti-woke bills and things like that.
Yeah.
And so it's just the people, I think, more than anything, and that's everybody is the truth. And what can we do without all these different layers and filters on it,
Yeah. Well, so let's unpack who the man was.
Yeah.
Because, again, we all say things, right? I have things that I say, you have things that you say, but let's unpack who Leadbelly really was. And so going back to it, so Leadbelly was actually, your grandmother was Leadbelly's niece.
Yes.
Okay. And so, he was born where?
He was born in Shreveport.
Okay, Shreveport, Louisiana. Okay.
1889.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
He was the second or the one or two children.
Yep.
His parents had farms, so they were pretty self-sustainable.
Yeah.
And
were the parents musicians or
no? They actually started a church where he's buried now.
Okay.
And that's where he got his music background.
Always starts in the church, right? Aretha Franklin was 12 when she was singing, that her father would have her singing all the time.
Tina Turner,
Reverend Franklin,
too, right? Tina Turner, maybe too.
Tina Turner, yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of great singers that started in the church. A lot of great musicians start in the church. With a lot of people, Anderson .Paak, just to bring it to modern day. Anderson .Paak is amazing. You hear Anderson .Paak, you're like, oh my God, he's great. He started in the church.
I wouldn't know that.
I know. I listened to his story and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So,
Well, then in the documentary that my grandmother speaks on Fannin Street. Fannin Street is still in existence in Shreveport today.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's where 50 Cent's new film studio was at.
Okay.
And back then it was kind of like a red light district.
Yeah.
And she jokingly says that, Leadbelly's father would hide him underneath the wagon when driving through Fannin Street, not to see the ladies in the windows and all the stuff going on. And Lead Belly jokingly says the first thing he did when he turned 18 was go to Fannin Street.
Yeah. That's hilarious. So I'm sure some of our listeners who are from Louisiana area and know Shreveport might be familiar with Fannin Street, although I don't know if it's the same today as it was then. So, so listen, the connection then really for Lead Belly is you.
Right.
You're kind of the, I guess, steward, if you will, of the Lead Belly legacy now. And how has it felt for all of that to kind of come on you? The mantle of that is you're carrying that now.
Yeah. Well, it's something that I'm honored by. It's something that when I was growing up, I saw my grandmother going to different events and speaking about him. She would go to conferences. She went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, all of these different things. And she would just always talk and she would just express her stories. And I saw that growing up. When I was a kid, I saw his pardon certificate on the wall, and I thought it was a college.
You thought it was a college diploma.
Diploma, right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. And so for me, it was more of a history buff like you.
Yep.
And I wanted to connect those dots. I'm a DJ, so I wanted to connect the musical stuff to it. But what I've realized now is that it's so much and that it's just good to be able to formulate these into new media presentations, right?
Yeah.
My sister, she works on the licensing and the business standpoint when people want to do pictures, or there's a Lead Belly Burgers in Omaha, Nebraska.
Right.
There's a whiskey that some company wanted to do. So she works on that part. I'm more on connecting the dots when Jack White opens up with Goodnight Irene, or when Keith Richards, is using it in his Netflix series.
Sure.
And how these all stories today connect. And so, I take it as I speak. I do the documentary recently, and I try my best to represent.
Yeah.
I have to. Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing when you think of it, and especially nowadays with the value of estates of creatives, right?
Right.
We're going to say anybody's a creative, right? But if you were a creative, if you were a talented artist, and I think of like all of the different people. I mean, now currently I'm thinking about like a Michael Jackson, but then we can go back to the estate of Marilyn Monroe, or you mentioned the movie that James Dean was in,
right?
Rebel Without a Cause.
Right.
James Dean has an estate. There's a value to the artistic license of using his image, his likeness, any type of reflection. And now with AI coming out, it's just a matter of time before they'll be able to say, oh, well, I could have a Lead Belly ringtone with his, with him telling me or wishing me good morning because I just like listening to Lead Belly. So
that's absolutely. He's got a song, Good Morning Blues, too.
Right.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So,
well, I mean, I don't know if your listeners know, but Randy himself is, part of a family of someone who's just as much as iconic as we all think, especially in the media world, where your grandfather interviewed a lot of great legends in his time.
Yeah. No, he definitely did. And I kind of feel like you do in terms of trying to steward that, because you never want it to go silent.
Right.
And you want it to be, and certainly this is not an episode about me or what, because actually I'm going to do an episode very soon for Black History Month that is going to talk about, my grandfather and the legacy that he left, because I think it's important, right? Just in the same way that you would want musicians to know about Lead Belly, Black musicians, brown musicians, white musicians, it doesn't matter. They need to know the history of the music and where it comes from. I want, like, every time I see a Black reporter or a reporter in general, I want them to know that, hey, there was a brother running around in the 60s when you didn't have any brothers doing that, covering the news at a national level. And so, it's like, I think it's important, right? Because people need to see people that look like them, that have achieved something in order for them to have some success. As crazy as that sounds, it's true.
And for, let's say, artists today that are listening today, I have friends who are artists themselves, right? And they're very concerned on making the music, getting it known today. Yeah. What I tell them is, hey, those posters that you go and perform with, save that.
Yeah.
Save these things to curate it, because years from now, your own children or your family members may get asked, hey, do you have the headphones? Do you have his laptop, that we want to put in the Smithsonian just like us?
Yeah, exactly.
If you think about it, they just built the Smithsonian Museum less than 10 years ago.
Oh, I know.
So what's going to happen in the next 40, 50 years of the new stuff? And where are they going to collect that from? And so Nowadays, you have people go on eBay and buy stuff because they know that that's
exactly
going to happen.
What the value is going to be.
So,
do they have any of Leadbelly's stuff?
They got his 12-string guitar there.
Okay, they do.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, they got a 12-string and a hat.
Okay.
That he had.
Very cool. I have to, when I go back the next time, I've only been once. When I go back the next time, I'll have to look for that. I know.
Yeah, it's in the music section.
I kind of, it was, first of all, if you're in Washington, D.C., you have to visit the National Black History Museum. It's simply amazing. It is there. I mean, there's so many amazing museums in Washington, D.C. That's at the top of it as far as I'm concerned, but they're all great. Mm-hmm. But certainly it's being a newer museum and the way that they collected the artifacts and they displayed them. Yeah. It was simply, I mean, I kind of lost it when I went in and actually saw my grandfather in there. And it was
you did? Okay.
Yeah, there's pictures of him because he covered Muhammad Ali when he was still Cassius Clay, when he was fighting Sonny Liston in Miami. So, and they made a movie about that, but he covered him and he was actually really good friends with Muhammad Ali. He was invited down there by Malcolm X and he was working on behalf of ABC News, but he was down. Yeah, he was down there. So there's a couple of pictures of him with Muhammad and Malcolm X and at the time, Cassius Clay's brother. And so he could have been in the room that one night in Miami, man. Well,
he could have been
certainly could have.
Because he probably was at the same hotel.
Might have been, yeah. Might have been.
That was the only black hotel in Miami, so he had to really be there.
That is true. And when you think about that, I mean, I know there was some artistic license taken to tell that whole story, but I thought it was a phenomenal story of all these icons in a room and just the things that they were talking about, But yeah, I mean, that museum, back to the museum, it's simply amazing. But I will have to make sure that I go back and see that 12-string guitar because I think that more than anything else is really interesting. But so now the music then, does that mean you guys have the rights to all the music?
We have the rights. We have a small percentage of it. This is the time where publishing just started.
Yeah.
The same publisher that Leadbelly has is the same one that did Wimbleway and We Shall Overcome.
Oh, wow.
And they started, they're now celebrating their 75th anniversary.
Okay.
So then when I calculated, I said 75 years. 1949, that's when Leadbelly passed.
Right.
So essentially he started their entire catalog and once they pulled him in, they got Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Odetta, Bob, all of these different, folk people. So he kind of started that. And that was the godfather of the publishing industry, essentially.
Yeah. And you think about even between here and Memphis, Stax and all these different record companies that, and there were a lot of black record companies that were created. I mean, it's interesting. And it's you hear people talk about all the time the power of the publish.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why I think Nas put his daughter gave her a producer credit on most of his stuff, because then that carries on and it carries on well beyond when Nas is gone. I mean, he's still a young guy for that matter, but you hear those stories and you understand the power of publishing things. And
that's where, hopefully as more people know the story, that kind of comes out.
Yeah.
It's not something that a lot of people would be as proud to think that happened to them.
Yep.
It could be on borderline exploitation.
Yeah.
When they started Leadbelly's publishing, he had already passed away.
Sure.
So what happened was Alan Lomax went to England and saw Lonnie Donegan, who the Beatles were opening up for, playing his entire show of Leadbelly songs.
Yep.
Lomax goes back and says, well, I know the widow. Yeah. And how do we get compensation for this? The publisher then says, well, do you have the lyrics written up? And then Lomax says, well, me and Leadbelly worked on a book, which they did in 1935.
Yeah.
And I typed the lyrics up while he sang them.
Hmm.
So then he's getting writer credit, and the administration publishing is going, the lion's share. So if we was today, it would be something that would be renegotiated and hopefully before it all reaches public domain.
Yeah.
Because, now we're on 75 after 15 more years it's public domain.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
I know.
It is interesting.
It is interesting. So, well, man, I hope, do you have a song that you have the rights to use and play at any time?
The one I do know he has 100% is Black Betty.
Black Betty. Okay.
Which Ram Jam, Dukes of Hazzard, everybody does that.
Does the original exist somewhere or?
And that's another thing. So Leadbelly took these songs that he learned and then remade them.
Yep.
So it's remixes of a lot of songs, and there's songs that he personally came up with.
Okay, I got you. Okay, interesting. Well, man, hopefully one day we we can share some of that on the podcast and, some of that music. I'm always up for sharing some music that I wouldn't normally be able to share, but because I get permission, I can do that because everything I share now is like royalty free. So
what this is helpful for Arkansas is the song Rock Island Line. When he was, I think me and you were talking about his prison tour. So when he was released in 1934, him and Lomax's went on the prison tour, and they actually came here to Arkansas.
Right.
It was Pine Bluff, Tucker,
Little Rock,
and Gold.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one, but he met a guy named Ironhead, and then he learned Rock Island Line. Well, Rock Island Line, everybody's recorded that. That was Lonnie Donegan's song, Johnny Cash. I mean, it's endless. So that one's one song that actually has an Arkansas connection to it.
Yeah. So tell us, how did he end up in prison?
Okay, so the first time was he was performing at a bar, and the way my grandmother, other people tell the story is there was a fight that broke out. The guy was jealous that his girlfriend was getting close to Leadbelly, and he actually cut Leadbelly, and Leadbelly defended himself, and there was a murder on that one. So he went to Sugarland, Texas. At Sugarland, Texas, while he was serving his term, the governor, Pat Neff, came in and said, what's some entertainment? And they sure enough got Leadbelly. When he came and performed on the spot, he said, if I had you like you had me, I'll wake up in the morning and set you free.
Yeah.
On his last day in office, he pardoned him.
Really?
Flash forward, there's Leadbelly's performing throughout the South again. This story is in Shreveport, and it may have been a mixed crowd because my grandmother said that he tried to go to the bathroom, and one of the white patrons didn't want him to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
And that fight broke out. Leadbelly probably whooped him up, beat him up pretty bad, and then ran for his life to the police department where the mob was outside calling for him. This is 1930s.
Yeah.
And so he then served term in Angola.
Wow. That's like one of the roughest prisons in the country. Angola.
Not the, right?
Yeah, if not the roughest prison. Yeah, Angola. If you don't know about Angola, folks, you need to look it up. Go to Wikipedia and maybe that's the sanitized version.
It's 11,000 acres.
Yeah, it's like Angola. I would say Parchman Prison, Mississippi. Yep. Of course, Alcatraz was rough. I've been to actually visited Alcatraz. It was the only prison I was up for visiting because I lived in the Bay Area. So you just had to go over to the Rock at some point in time. Right. Plus, I loved that movie, Escape from Alcatraz with Clint Eastwood. But yeah, I mean, you talk about prisons, and I used to see San Quentin all the time. Okay. And when I was living there, in my mind, I was like, wow, that's San Quentin. There lives Charles Manson. It's the home of Charles Manson. It's the home of the Night Stalker, that Richard Ramirez, who at the time was living there. I mean, it's just,
It's a fascination how America has prisoners and these bad guys of history. Yeah. And we know they got their own documentaries and films and TV series,
Absolutely.
But with Leadbelly, of course, he didn't have a fair trial. It was very speedy.
Yeah.
It would have clearly been a self-defense case today. Mm-hmm. And so he ends up in Angola. And while he was there, the father and son, Alan and John Lomax, working with the Library of Congress, meet him. And he did the same thing again. Hey, I'll make a song for the governor. Can you see it? Send it to him. They didn't believe it. Sure enough, he came at their door and was released. So that's the legend, is that he sung his way out 2 times.
Wow. Wow. You only hear, stuff like that sounds like, that's the stuff of movies, right? That's only and speaking of which, a life, right? But speaking of which, how come has a movie been made about him at all?
The only one is Gordon Parks' last film. You haven't seen it?
No.
The 1976 one?
No.
Oh, wow. Okay.
What's it called?
Leadbelly.
Oh, it is called
Leadbelly.
Okay.
And it only deals with those early years around Dallas, Texas. So it doesn't deal with his later years in New York City.
Okay.
The guy, Mosley from Magnum P.I., Walter Mosley.
Yes.
He plays Leadbelly.
He plays Leadbelly.
That was his first film.
Okay. Interesting. Well, that goes way back. That was before Magnum P.I.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, Gordon Parks was very talented. So, and for those of you that don't know, Gordon Parks was the director of Shaft.
Yep.
So, so we can, and we just lost Richard Roundtree last year. So, but wow, okay, I'll have to look that up. I apologize, I wasn't aware of that, but I'll certainly put a link in the show notes for people to watch that. So,
and I want to do, the hopes is to, as we do this story and more of this, is to bring out another version of them.
Yeah.
Whether it's a series or another full length.
I could totally see a series about Lead Belly.
Bass Reeves kind of almost.
Oh yeah, Bass Reeves is out now, and the star of that, David and I always butcher his last name, but he starred as Martin Luther King in Selma. David Oyelowo. Mm-hmm. He talks about just the power of playing that role of Bass Reeves.
I haven't watched it yet.
And it's really important because he was basically one of the first marshals. And he's a black man. And, we have a brand new U.S. Marshals Museum in Fort Smith now.
Okay.
Were you aware of that?
No,
it's
didn't.
Like brand spanking new.
His statue's in Fort Smith.
Yeah, I know it is. Yeah. So it's interesting to tie those two. I'm going to take my kids down there so we can go to the museum. And I would encourage anybody listening to this, if you have some time and you're headed down to the River Valley at any point in time, to definitely look up the U.S. Marshals Museum and take a visit for it. I think it would be well worth your time, and you could spend an afternoon there. And there's quite a bit of history, including the history of Bass Reeves. Yeah. So it's worth checking out. It's definitely worth checking out. So, well, listen. So he talked his way out of jail twice. Mm-hmm. I mean, the man had a way with words. Mm-hmm. Clearly, he had a way with words to the point where his words are still resonating today.
Correct.
Right. So there's power in the ability for you to express yourself through language. And so what would you, for your family, mm-hmm. what was your earliest recollection or understanding that, I'm related to somebody famous? Like, I didn't know, I kind of understood it because I would see my grandfather on TV from time to time and people would talk about him. And I didn't realize my grandfather was famous until I went to an event with him and Philip Michael Thomas was there from Miami Vice. And this was like when Miami Vice was number one on TV.
Okay.
And my grandfather was headlining an event with him. And I was like, oh, okay, baby, this dude's, and I was like 15 at the time. And I was like, wow, okay.
He clearly knew who he was. And
yeah. So
mm-hmm.
it was, and my grandfather was there and I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of big. But for you, what was that age or when did you realize, oh man, I'm connected with somebody that's really special?
It has to be the postal stamp.
Okay.
That may have been 92.
Okay.
Yeah, 1992, early 90s. That's when I knew. It's like Chuck D, most of my heroes don't appear on the stamp.
Stamps, right. And
then 4 years later, Billy's on the stamp.
On the stamp, yeah.
It was a whole series of folk singers with him, Woody Guthrie, Sonny Terry, all of them, it's really good artwork.
Yeah.
That was the one time.
Do you still have a picture of that anyway?
Yeah.
You do?
I still got that.
I might have to get that from you. So a copy of that. That looks good.
There's been other slide references that I caught on from like Beck. I'm a loser, baby. That guy, he's a big Lead Belly fan. Besides the connection, when I learned about him was that Prison Partner on the Wall. But when I knew that he was...
What you thought was a diploma.
Right.
It really was a diploma. It was a diploma that got him out.
Got him out of
It's
worth framing, isn't it?
Do you guys still have that?
Yeah. It's actually next to the guitar at the museum.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So many different... that's a good question, but it was probably the postal stamp.
Okay. That was 92. That was a while back.
Yeah. I was still young. So many influences So there's a guy that is named John Reynolds who's a really big Lead Belly fan and friend of my grandmother. Mm-hmm. He would send me tons of articles, pull out some magazines. Anytime somebody mentioned it, he would, connect the dots. And so he helped me also to learn a lot of these different things over time. I would have never known.
Yeah.
Like an artist, he would find a sculptor. There's a stone sculpture in Dallas Museum of Art that is still there when the guy made it of Lead Belly in 1948.
Oh, really?
And he's a real popular sculptor guy himself. I can't think of the name right now.
Okay. Interesting.
And that's in the museum right there, you know? So again, those friendships of people that he knew who then themselves became people. I think that itself is the fascinating part for me because they must have saw something in him. He was the oldest guy in the room. He clearly came from the hard times of the South. He clearly had some entertainment that he was providing. But if you've got a stone sculpture that nobody knows and he does one of Lead Belly and then 2024 it's in the museum. You've got a film producer and Then says, I got this movie with a guy named James Dean.
Yeah.
If you got a young guy doing, Harlem shows, and there's Harry Belafonte, there was these interesting people that was always around him when they hadn't become who they were yet.
Yeah. And it's so really the influence of Leadbelly lives on in the works of all of these individuals.
Exactly.
Because you mentioned Paul Robeson, you mentioned Harry Belafonte. So, I mean, yeah, that's exciting. And he was 60 when he died.
Yeah.
So he was still young.
He was still young.
Yeah. He was still young when he passed away.
What we do know is that he did try to get in some Hollywood Westerns.
Okay.
But he was too old. He had the gray hair and didn't have the the young guy look.
Right.
But he would have definitely lived it.
I'm sure he would have. So tell me how you see the cultural and historical impact of his music into today.
I see
the significance.
Very important because it's the foundation for American roots music.
Okay.
Which then leads into rock and roll,
right?
Hip hop, blues, jazz. So I see him as important because he was an instrumentalist. So he played an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
He was a storyteller. So he was someone who was giving us stories on what was going on in America at the time. He's important because of how he fought himself.
Right.
He's got his own protests. And then just on the personal level, that resilience, that self-determination, if you come from any condition, wherever you are, in America or wherever, you can still come out of that.
Mm-hmm.
For him, he came from, prison farms and still became somebody in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He wasn't Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because of his crimes and infamous bad guy character, but because he did songs that everybody enjoys. Goodnight, Irene, children's songs, things like that. And so I think his significance, as we are in a time where America's learning its past, learning its old history, he's somebody who was actually telling us in real time about it.
Yeah.
What I want to do is now relate that into more digital, media, where there's, interactive experiences, where there's film. How do we kind of connect those dots to today? That's my whole key thing. Because people like Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, they know it. For someone like Chuck D, he knows it.
Yeah.
And these are all people that a lot of us are, influenced by.
Well, and it's so funny you mention that. I think of like Rick Rubin and others.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys are those guys, I don't know if you've ever watched any of those Rick Rubin shows, where they interview him in his studio there in California. It's impressive because he's always sitting there barefoot talking about stuff. I mean, but the man is a student of the industry.
Yeah.
He's a student of music. And I tell people all the time, if you want to become good at something, you need to become a student of it.
Yes.
Right. And I feel like with podcasting, I've tried to become a student of podcasting to understand the best podcasters out there and the best people that do it. But, fill in the blank, whatever your, fascination is with whatever, creative force that you're excited about, you need to become a student of it.
Yeah. Put the time in. Put the time and hours in, and also to take it seriously.
Yeah.
So with Leadbelly's note, Pete Seeger again gave me and this is so funny because when we interviewed Pete Seeger, he lived in a log cabin in upstate New York. He had the whole Hudson River in the background. And it was January, so it was cold. And the fireplace was cracking.
Yeah.
I felt like a little small kid listening to some bedtime stories when I walked in. But Pete gave something that was very good. He said, while me and Woody and all of us were trying to play the average man, flannel shirts, and jeans and boots, Leadbelly wore tuxedos.
Yeah.
He came in on time. He looked at, hey, this is an opportunity and I'm going to show my best.
Yeah.
Again, he was that example, what you're saying, you put in the time and you take it serious,
Yeah. Which for a lot of people at that point in time, they wouldn't have given him the time of day, if you will, to think that he would operate from that level. But what you're telling me is that he treated it he understood the value of what he was creating and he treated it like a business, but it was still art.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Whereas a lot of other people, it was art and it was art for art's sake. And, whatever, I don't really care about the commercial aspect of it. I'm just out here playing my music.
Yeah.
And there is a difference.
It is.
There's definitely a difference.
It definitely is.
And I'm not judging one way or the other in terms of people's deciding motivates them to do what they do, right? Because I get it. I mean, some people just want to paint. They want to paint. Some people just want to make music. They don't want to be they don't want to be encumbered by a bunch of other things or contracts and all this other stuff.
Right.
But I think it's important to understand that, but for someone who was in a space where a lot of times things were just taken from them, your great uncle really operated at a level where, people had to respect what he was doing and make sure that they gave him space for him to do what he was doing.
Absolutely. I agree about that. So he did end up, one time he went to Europe was in Paris.
Okay.
So he didn't go to London or anything. And that's why when you hear the people say Muddy Waters and then went to London first, that's true. But he went to Europe first. It was just Paris.
Sure.
Because you remember Paris at the time was jazz and black music.
Yeah.
And so,
that's why Josephine Baker spent so much time
out there.
Yeah.
He also at that time period, as those jazz and the swing musicians thought that he was a little outdated. They didn't like the acoustic, kind of Southern accent, folk singing. They were wanting to go a little bit more faster, upbeat. But he stayed on what he knew. He stayed in his lane, and he still felt like, hey, there's a market for that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's also important too, because a lot of creators feel like, man, I've been doing this for 10 years, and now I'm at this point. Now I got a little buzz. Do I now do what's the most popular thing today? No, stick to what you know. And I think that's a good word of advice for people.
I mean, I think it is, right? Because you look at today and everybody's like, oh well, the TikTokification of everything.
Yeah,
everything is not necessarily meant to be disseminated on TikTok.
Right.
I think TikTok's a great platform for what it does.
Right.
Capturing the minds and the ideas of people and sharing information. And if you're looking for a mass ability to get your information out, that certainly is one of them. But if you're also looking to do something where you can have a sounding board for what you're doing and you get that feedback, there's nothing like playing, a small club with 20 seats.
Yeah.
Because it's just a different feel.
Yeah.
It is just a different feel. So, I was looking at Robert Glasper. He was performing at the Blue Note in New York versus like the North Sea Jazz Festival. I mean, thousands of people in the stands for the North Sea Jazz Festival. Blues Festival, Blue Note in New York City. I mean, that club, I think it holds maybe like 30 people, 40 people. It's small. It's like some of the other smaller jazz places. And there's a reason why they're small, because they're small and they're intimate, and it gives the chance for the creator to have a real connection with the audience.
It's kind of like the Tiny Desk.
Yeah.
It's not an audience, but it's.
Do you think Leadbelly would have done a Tiny Desk concert?
He would have loved that. He would have definitely loved that. Oh man, he would have.
I think that would have been cool. I watched a bunch of those. I mean, I watched all of them during the pandemic, but I mean, it's amazing what you can do.
It pulls something different out of the artists that we normally see.
It does.
I agree with that.
It really does, man. Gosh, look, we could go on and on. I mean, there's so much we could talk about, and I think we've talked about, some of the cultural and historical impact of Leadbelly, and certainly his impact is still being felt today. What are your hopes as you move forward, as you're one of the stewards of the Leadbelly platform and the story? What are you hoping to accomplish with Leadbelly here in Northwest Arkansas?
Good question. What I would like to accomplish is first do a screening. I want the people to see it here. I want to see it on the big screen. And I would like to work on a series of...
When you say screening of
the documentary. So the documentary is Leadbelly, the man who invented rock and roll.
Okay. All right.
And we've been in 2 film festivals so far, Nashville and one in New York. And now I'm going to take the show on the road. With that is to collaborate with different organizations or institutions, your museums out here.
Yeah.
And, or your theater squares or Walton Art Centers and things like that, to now possibly bring it here for an actual performance. So one part, see the documentary, but in the next part, is there an exhibit that I can do?
Yeah.
Or is there a tribute concert?
Yeah.
We see the tribute Prince and, tribute Michael Jackson concerts, and people show up. So we're the artists. So now another good answer is, who are the artists here in Northwest? If you're here, please contact Randy, blow his email box up and say Leadbelly cover songs. And you're more than welcome to link with me and
do a Leadbelly concert.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that would be fun.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would listen. If anybody's listening to this and even remotely is connected with someone, or you are that someone that has an interest in getting Leadbelly's music out there and you've played it before and you've done the covers, holler at your boy, and I'm going to put you in touch with Alvin, and let's put something together, right? And continue to move the story of Leadbelly out there to the widest audience possible. Because I think there's a whole new generation of folks that haven't even discovered Leadbelly yet.
No. And just think, my daughter, 13-year-old, walks around with the Nirvana shirt. Yes. You see kids run with it, right?
Right.
Well, in the MTV Unplugged, Kurt says our favorite artist is Leadbelly. And then he goes and sings, Where Did You Sleep Last Night? You haven't seen that clip?
I've heard you mention something about that, and I was a huge
Nirvana
Kurt Cobain fan.
I wasn't at the time.
I was. I got it like right away.
I did not.
Like
I didn't get it.
The moment that it came out, I was just like, wow, okay, this is on a whole nother level. And when he died, I was just like, wow.
So he was sad. A huge fan. I mean, we've got the cassette tape. A guy sent me a picture from Seattle of a cassette tape that he actually had. We got pictures of him wearing a T-shirt that we didn't even sell. Like he must have bought it from a fan club.
Sure.
So he was so yes. And anybody who are doing Nirvana covers and Nirvana influence, just, go back in the archives, do your own version of In the Pines.
That's amazing. Yeah, well, that's that whole grunge scene up in the Pacific Northwest that includes Pearl Jam, Nirvana. I mean, so it's crazy when you think of, you almost get goosebumps thinking about the influence that a man from Shreveport, Louisiana had on the world, but specifically on the music here in the United States.
Yeah, it is.
It's powerful.
It's very powerful.
To me, it almost hurt my head to be thinking about, man, there's just so many different synapses here, connections that need to be made, right?
That's where I'm at. Person. Right, I know. That's where I'm at, because there's murals. Someone sent me a picture at the Slutty Vegan restaurant in Dallas. He's on the wall.
Oh,
so
man,
who's that artist that?
There.
Yeah, me too. So who's the artist that made that painting?
Right.
I told you he's in the bust in Dallas Museum.
Oh, my gosh.
These are not even music stuff.
Yeah.
And then we talked about Gordon Parks did a film.
Well, there needs to be a mural of him in Deep Ellum in Dallas. That would be cool.
That would be nice.
But as much as they create murals around here, they should create one. That'd be cool if somebody did a mural around here of Leadbelly. So Olivia Trimble, if you're listening, or any of the other talented artists out there, you want to do a Leadbelly mural, let us know, because I think it would be worthwhile to do. So
that would be nice, and do a little concert or something right in front of it or something, a tribute. That would be nice.
And so we have you to thank, really, for that connection with Leadbelly here, which was one of the influences of the juke joint at the Pryor Center with
music
Orson
education.
Weems, and shout out to the Music Education Initiative. What Orson's doing is amazing, and he gets it. He understands it. So,
and that's why I like with the juke joint, is because that's an actual physical space.
Yeah.
So he's provided a space, and now, to do another event there would be perfect.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Alvin, man, thank you so much for taking time to sit down with me again. You're kind of like a second guest on the podcast. Again, the last time we were talking about something totally different, but this time we're talking about your family and the amazing Leadbelly. And certainly I want to encourage anyone that is listening to this episode. If you've never heard a Leadbelly song, I'm going to try to figure out and put a Leadbelly playlist together, and I'm going to attach it to the show notes. Just check it out for yourself and see if you can't notice tracks, if you can't notice bars from what Leadbelly has created that you've heard on more contemporary music. Because I guarantee you'll find it. So
I didn't ask, when did you first hear about it? Like, how did you know?
I didn't. I'm ashamed to say this. I didn't know about Leadbelly until you gave me the little book. But you knew there was little things that probably over your time it started coming back. Well, and I knew that there was a precursor to Johnny Cash, that he was influenced by a black man. I just didn't know the black man's name. People had told me, Johnny Cash, he was influenced by this guy, and I couldn't remember the name or anything like that. But then you and I connected. And then you gave me the little discography, and then I put two and two together, and that's where it goes. So
thank you, man, for the show.
Speaking of which, I need to get that back to you. But yes, it is, suffice to say, it is a pleasant surprise to be so closely connected to someone who is kin with this individual, right? Be like meeting somebody that's Elvis Presley's great niece, right? Or great nephew. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is it. So, but anyway, I appreciate you, Alvin, coming to sit down with us and to share your story and to share the story of Lead Belly. And I really want to encourage everybody listening to this. This was more like a history lesson episode of the podcast with a Northwest Arkansas connection. And it's Arkansas all throughout this. So, I hope you guys understand the significance of this episode. But thank you so much, man, for joining us. And we really appreciate you. If anybody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can go to the website, houseofleadbelly.com.
Okay.
And you can actually email me at leadbellyarchive@gmail.
Okay. So we'll put all that in the show notes, but houseofleadbelly.com.
Yep.
And they will be able to go ahead and check that information out and connect with you.
That's it.
Okay. Perfect. So, but listen, man, we appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today and just sharing a little bit of history with us. So
thanks a lot, man.
Absolutely.
Everybody take care.
Absolutely. Well, folks, there you have it. Another episode of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. I hope you enjoyed that. I took so many notes, and I will certainly share all this information with you in the show notes, but Alvin's a dear friend, and I'm so excited to be able to help expand his platform with the folks in our listening audience. And so we hope you enjoyed this. Remember, the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast comes out every Monday, rain or shine. You can also check us out every Tuesday on an episode of Ozarks at Large, which runs both at 12 and at 7. And again, if you like these type of podcasts, you like these stories that we're telling, please reach out and let us know. Just reach out to us and we'd be happy to hear from you. We've got a lot in store for 2024. And so we hope to bring you more episodes like this. And again, we really appreciate you listening, and we appreciate everyone that's part of the I Am Northwest Arkansas tribe. I am your host, Randy Wilburn, and we'll see you back here next week with another new episode. Peace.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. Check us out each and every week, available anywhere that great podcasts can be found. For show notes or more information on becoming a guest, visit iamnorthwestarkansas.com. We'll see you next week on I Am Northwest Arkansas.